What would it feel like to be free? Do you constantly try and make changes in your life but always slip back into old ways? I used to be constantly frustrated by my lack of willpower. What I never knew is that there was a reason why I could not control myself, and that there are processes that you can follow to regain your freedom. I interview some of the most knowledgeable and compassionate minds talking about breaking all varieties of bad habits and how to actually live a joyful and fulfilling life. Listen to the show and hit subscribe to free yourself from the shackles of the mind. And if you find some benefit, please share it with a friend and let's make the world a better place together. Welcome to the Break the Chain podcast. I'm here today with Richard Margesson. Richard served as an officer in the British Army for 20 years in a number of war zones and as the Queen's Guard at Buckingham Palace. He suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder from his army career and decided to work in psychotherapy and hypnotherapy for many years. He's also the founder of the Walk for War charitable project that raises awareness for post-traumatic stress injury amongst frontline public servants. Richard, it's a huge honour to have you here. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Oh, thank you very much for inviting me, James. I'm delighted to be here and to, offer you and your listeners hopefully some information that's going to be of value to them.
I think it's going to be incredibly insightful. I've heard a bit of your story before, and I was intrigued and fascinated. I was wondering if you could share a bit of that with us today, please.
Yeah, sure. Where to begin? I think I'll just keep the story really focused on my experience of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD. Because it was through that experience that sort of very negative experience, actually, that ended up inspiring me in a way to go and find out what really happens to a person like myself or anyone else with the development of PTSD. And that experience, as horrible as it was at the time, provided the motivation to, one, become a psychotherapist once I'd been on my own, I guess you could say, semi-healing journey. And it was through being a therapist, and specifically a clinical hypnotherapist, that I really got interested in some quite diverse areas that are all interlinked. And it's to do with how the mind works. Why are some people able to go through horrific experiences and emerge, changed, of course, because every experience changes you, but able to cope with life after that set of experiences? And at the same time, why is it that some people develop this condition or cluster of symptoms associated with PTSD? And that led me into areas like anthropology and paleoanthropology, the study of people in different societies and cultures around the world, and especially in what we might call indigenous communities, people who, those rare groups of people who are still living what you could call a Stone Age hunter-gatherer lifestyle. Because it turns out that those people seem to have, in fact, I'm convinced they do have an absolutely inbuilt set of protective measures that kind of armor themselves against developing mental health or emotional health disorders. So as part of that, what I did is I decided to see if I could replicate in the 21st century something approximating that lifestyle. And the way I chose to do it was to walk from the very north tip of New Zealand all the way down to Stewart Island over about 4 months, 1,600 kilometers, living as close to nature as I could. And I can tell you that experience was absolutely transforming and taught me so much about how to at least attempt to live a life in this somewhat crazy 21st century, developed nation, Western society that we're in, and to bring in some of those protective measures that I spoke of before. And it was really through that experience that I number one, developed my not-for-profit charity, Walk Off War, which really is all about getting out into the community, speaking to groups, businesses, all the rest of it about PTSD and raising awareness of what it is, how it develops, and especially what anyone can do to recover from a traumatic event or a series of traumatic events, so that they can, look life in the eye and become a nice, brave, happy, coping little soul again. And it also led me into a really strong passion for helping restore this country's incredible biodiversity. Because I'm absolutely convinced that any one of us is healthier in a really pure natural environment. And I currently own a business called Free the Tree, and we service Auckland Council and large property owners to help them with their eco-restoration challenges. And I'd like to touch on that because work and the people we work with are two areas that are incredibly important to recovering from post-traumatic stress disorder.
I've never had a post-traumatic stress disorder as an isolated thing, but I know when recovering from addiction that I had a very similar experience when it came to recovery. That environment, having that healing environment, was extremely important for me as well. And I wonder if it crosses over. There's some crossover between those two things.
I think there's a strong crossover, and I think also, in any healing journey, it's really important to surround yourself with people who support you, who share your values, and who can encourage you to remain engaged socially. Because one of the worst effects of post-traumatic stress disorder, as I think with addiction, is that you tend to withdraw and you don't fully engage with life and people around you.
Yeah. Can you tell us, explain what PTSD is?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's really important. So I always think of post-traumatic stress disorder as a form of anxiety. Basically, that's how I'd explain it as a therapist to a client. And really, what has happened is that a part of your brain, there's a very, very clear neurological connection, through neuroscience studies. Part of your brain literally changes its chemical composition, and that produces a cascade of results, and that happens as a result of, I call it trauma with a capital T. That's one of those true life-threatening events. A major car accident, combat, any number of things. Or it could be a series of smaller traumas that build up over time, and I call those the small T for traumas. So think about, a child at school being bullied and maybe not the happiest or safest home environment. The effect of that series of small T traumas builds up over time and becomes a really big thing. We see the same thing in the workforce, with sexual harassment or bullying behavior by managers. Yeah. So what happens is, just think of it as a part of the brain changes its chemical composition. It puts you on an elevated stress plane, and that has an effect on the entire nervous system. It kind of, the event becomes an emotional memory that stays stuck in the body as well as in the brain. And it then leads to that cascade of changed behaviors and symptoms. And it creates, you could say, a kind of downward spiral. And as I used to explain to my clients, the whole point of therapy is to stop that downward spiral and really help people to regain their best self.
What do you think causes the downward spiral?
Well, it's a whole number of things. So the part of the brain, let me explain it this way, the part of the brain that changes through a traumatic event is located within the limbic system. That's the emotional, subconscious emotional part of the brain. And the specific part that changes is the amygdala or amygdala. I used to just call it Amy, give it a little bit of personification. And Amy is kind of the oldest part of the brain. You know, we share it with every other mammal on the planet, as well as birds and so on. And it's really, it's sometimes described as the fear center because it is there to keep us safe in truly life-threatening situations. And when it's activated, it puts us in that fight, flight, or freeze stress response, which is a fantastic response when your life really does look as though it's under threat. You know, if you smell smoke in your house, you're going to go on high alert to find out where the source of fire is and do all those things. You know, your body gets supercharged with that cascade of stress hormones to keep yourself and your loved ones safe. The problem that develops when the trauma is too great for a person to absorb, and when the amygdala changes and becomes sensitized, basically, is that you begin to live life as though almost anything could be a source of great danger. I'll give you an example from my own experience. You know, I spent 7 months in central Bosnia during the height of the civil war there. Extremely dangerous place to be. We were under fire most days, and, you know, many, many other dangers. About halfway through the tour, you know, we were all given a week's leave to leave the war zone and recover. I went to Switzerland. It was midwinter. I wanted to go skiing with my wife. And I arrived in a beautiful Swiss town as a snowstorm was developing. Had a wonderful meal, you know, great reunion, fantastic to be out with clean sheets and all the rest of it. At 2 o'clock in the morning, I was fast asleep, but my subconscious, the amygdala, picked up the absolutely distinctive sound of a mortar, you know, a heavy shell being fired. And I then heard a boom. This is all while I was still asleep, by the way. So this is just an oversensitized mind, you know, on the lookout for danger. And I woke up underneath our bed with my wife looking down at me going, "What are you doing down there, Richard?" And what it was is that the Swiss ski patrol people had been firing a few mortars to trigger avalanches before, you know, to make the slopes safe. So that's a great example. You know, I didn't know it at the time, of course, but, you know, that's an excellent example of what can happen. It's incredibly common for people who have been, you know, through a terrible experience to be triggered by this subconscious emotional memory. And it, you know, smell is extraordinarily powerful. So is sound. It could be a certain look on a person's face. It could be a situation. again, another example from personal experience. It took me a couple of years and some conscious resolve in order to go into a cafe or a restaurant and not sit with my back to a wall, because I'd been in places where it was actually really important to sit with your back to a wall so that you could scan the room and see what was happening. And, again, that's just a symptom and an example of how post-traumatic stress can change a person's behavior.
If someone has been through a traumatic event and they're wondering, whether they are being, because I'm sure that some people can be being affected by a load of things and be quite confused about the experience they're having. Are there any other symptoms of PTSD?
Yeah, there are many. One of the worst is insomnia, the ability to get a really good night's sleep. And sleep is incredibly important for healthy functioning of the brain. So, again, another example drawn from my experience is that at the time of the 9/11 attacks on the World Trade Center, I'd just left the military. I'd just moved to Australia. My marriage at the time wasn't going very well, and indeed failed within about a year. So I had quite a few stresses, a lot of major changes. I hadn't addressed the post-traumatic stress at all. All I knew was that I felt really shaky. And in fact, I left the military specifically because I didn't feel safe in myself to lead young men and women in dangerous places. So I'd made all these changes. 9/11 happened. The post-traumatic stress got worse. And about a year later, I started having these screaming nightmares where the dream was incredibly real. And the dream was that I was trapped in one of those top floors in one of those buildings. Incredibly vivid. Some nights I'd have the same dream, 2 or 3 times. And of course, that wrecks your sleep. It also makes you reluctant to go to bed. And rather than seeking help, which is incredibly common with ex-soldiers and other frontline public servants, what I did, familiar story to you, is I started to self-medicate, specifically with alcohol. Now, alcohol, as we all know, actually interferes even more with sleep patterns. So that's a great example of that downward spiral. So part of the spiral was lack of sleep. The next part of the spiral was trying to self-medicate with something that was actually going to prevent healthy sleep. And then, the next part of that spiral is that you feel pretty crappy the next day because you're tired, you're scared, you know things aren't going well. You've probably got a hangover or similar. And so those get in the way of encouraging you to do the things that are healthy, like exercising, or like going out with friends, or like getting on a job hunt, or any number of things. And then that leads down to that negative self-thinking of I'm not worthy, I'm not good enough, what's wrong with you? You used to be strong, you used to be able to lead men and women, and now you're a mess, and then that will head downwards as well. Sadly, and the research is crystal clear. The worst place a survivor can go to, of course, is just wanting to end the pain and taking their own lives. That is still a major problem with ex-servicemen who have served, in the recent war in Afghanistan and Iraq and elsewhere.
One of the things, there's in doing some research on this, and I've known PTSD is quite a common thing, isn't it? It's not an uncommon thing for people to experience. And in doing the research, one of the things that I found that I've seen happen in people that's confused me at the time is how people can change so fast from seeming completely fine all of a sudden, and this complete change in almost personality, and you're dealing with a completely different person. And that's the past can be completely brought back as if it's happening right in front of your, like what you experienced at the time, you can actually experience in the present moment and can't differentiate between what happened then and what happened now. And it's almost like you've got stuck at that point and it's still there.
That's a great description of what happens. It can sound like a little bit of a cliche, but it's not. It's absolutely true. You can take the man or woman out of the war zone, but you can't take the war out of the person. They bring it home with them. And when they get triggered, it really is for the person as if they're straight back there. And that is because of the chemical changes that have taken place within the subconscious emotional part of the brain. It's as if the memory, that emotional memory, the heart pounding, terrified feeling, just has come back.
And that manifests physically as well, doesn't it? It's not just a psychological thing; it actually manifests in the body as well, doesn't it? With the heart rate and
very much so. I mean, I had a number of panic attacks, which are absolutely terrifying because they can come out of the blue. What I learned through my own journey of recovery, I guess you could say, is that somewhere, somehow, for some reason, that emotional fear center of my brain got triggered, and produce that heart-pounding, stomach-clenching, dizzying, out of control feeling, which basically is a panic attack. Yeah.
As a mechanism, is PTSD, what's the function of PTSD? Is it kind of a function of the body where it's trying to help you?
Yes, it is. You have to remember, I think the way to look at it is that fear center of the brain only has one role, and that is to keep you alive. So the purpose of PTSD, if you like, is actually to keep you alive. The trouble is that because that part of the brain has changed, it's seeing threats where threats don't actually exist. It's as if it's created a kind of template, and it is in fact an emotional memory, so that when that part of the brain is reminded, if you like, that of the previous danger and it's sensing it now, it will do anything in its power to put you in that state of fight, flight, or freeze. If that makes sense.
Yeah. That was quite ironic because the picture of you that I'm looking at literally froze as you said freeze. And I was like, oh, have I lost Richard, or is that just frozen? We're going to leave that one in there. We're not going to cut that one out. That was quite amusing.
Yeah. James, we live in a quantum mechanics world, apparently. So.
I'm just going to read through the list of some of the symptoms that came up because I thought they were quite interesting, and we've actually touched on most of them. So remembering the past is painful. You can relive what happened as if it's in the present moment. It's hard to want to do anything, so you kind of a loss of motivation. Some of these sounded to me like they would be kind of linked in with depression, but I wonder if depression's something that can be tied in with this quite easily sometimes. Hyperarousal, so that's that being kind of really jacked up and full of cortisol and adrenaline, I guess, is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Agoraphobia, so not wanting to go out anywhere,
Yes.
not wanting to go to busy places. This one I found quite interesting. Memory loss and loss of cognitive ability, and linked in with things like disassociation and stuff. Them things kind of, I guess that can be quite scary experiences for people. Would be maybe characterized by like a feeling of like a numbness.
Very true.
I mean, if someone's experiencing something like that, that must be, quite a terrifying thing to go through. What would be your advice to someone who's experiencing these things?
I think get help. Learn about what's going. It's like I'll just go back to my therapy days, which were a number of years ago. What I said to every single client is, you are not the problem. The person is never the problem. The problem is the problem. And we're going to help you identify that problem, and we're going to work with you to find solutions for it. One of the problems with any anxiety disorder, and, by the way, I never think of anxiety, depression, or anger, which are basically the three patterns. If we go back to that real life-threatening stress situation, we only have those three options. Fight, well, there's your anger. Flight, there's your anxiety. Freeze, there's your depression. And they very often, in fact, for most people, you'll find all three work together. They just manifest at different times and in different ways. So, point number one is the problem is the problem, and we will find ways with you, based on you as a personality and your values and all the rest of it, to get on top of them. Really important. Secondly, education is absolutely key. And part of what I really enjoyed doing as a therapist was helping inform and sometimes teach people how their mind actually works, because most of us are not taught this. And when you do get some really nice, simple stories and explanations of what's really going on, it gives a person a sense of agency over themselves. And that's extraordinarily important, because one place PTSD takes you is into that sense of powerlessness, because you probably felt incredibly powerless back in that life-threatening or seemingly life-threatening situation. And then the other one is, I think, really to, let people know that, it took me a long time to get this, that there is nothing shameful about developing these symptoms or having gone through the experience you've gone through or responded in the way you've gone through. Now, many soldiers, we are trained, taught, developed to be strong, to overcome fear, to go through the drills and the routines under life-threatening situations. It's no different firemen or ambulance drivers or any of our other public first responders. And that's absolutely, important and critical in performing your daily work in high-stress situations. Where it works against you is when the pressure has become too much, you've developed the symptoms, and then you have to do the thing that's hardest for people in those professions, and that is to stick your hand up and go, you know what, I'm not traveling well. I actually need help myself. I've helped other people maybe for years and decades. Now it's my turn. And getting them into that frame of mind where they can drop that sense of shame about, hey, I'm vulnerable, and going, let's help you see that vulnerability as an incredibly important part of your toolkit moving forward.
I think one of the difficult things with even education can be an incredibly triggering thing for someone who's been affected by PTSD. I mean, where's the kind of the safest place to start with educating yourself on PTSD?
I think personally, I wouldn't do it alone. I think I'll never forget. Actually, it's a really valid point. I'll never forget when I first moved to Australia. I was really struggling at home and struggling to find work, and I was in the grip of it. And my ex-wife at the time cut out a newspaper article from a local newspaper. About PTSD, and a group of Vietnam vets had got together, and she said, "That's your problem." And I just felt this, really terrible sense of shame, and it closed me off. So I really get where you're coming from with that. The my advice would be to, if you can, engage with somebody who's been or is well down the journey themselves. That can really help, because you've got someone who's kind of holding your hand with where they've been, and you won't get re-triggered, hopefully, with that. And if you do, they're able to support you through it. The other one is, we do actually have some fantastic online and telephone mental health services in this country. Very good people on them. They're well trained. It's anonymous. It's confidential. A person could ring up and go, "Hey, I'm going through these symptoms. What do you think? What could be my next step? Hey." That was actually my journey. The first step I made was to ring a confidential mental health crisis line and just talk it through with a stranger. That worked for me in the place where I was at, with shame about vulnerability, thinking I was going crazy, thinking it was my fault or there was something wrong with me, and just having a stranger's voice on the end of the telephone really, really helped and encouraged me to take the next step and find someone I could work with in person, face to face. I'd also say the role of the partner, if you're in a relationship, is unbelievably important. I'm very happily married now, have been for 20 years. And, when things pop up, as they do, we're all human. I've got someone by my side who's been with me through every step of the way. And she's just a tremendous resource.
Yeah. So something you said that really struck me is education helps you to get some autonomy over things and to kind of defeat that sense of powerlessness. And that to me is definitely the scariest emotion, because it's kind of like, once you get to the point of feeling like you have no power whatsoever, then things kind of get desperate. And to get into a position where you do feel like you have a little bit of control again, and you're saying that the best way to do that is by learning and to not do that alone, which I think is absolutely tremendous advice. Because something that Gabor Mate said was, trauma is not what happens when something happens, it's what happens when you get left alone with that for a long period of time. It's that feeling of being alone with that problem. It makes it like trying to deal with things alone, especially when you don't have the tools, is not a good idea. Something else that ties into what we just said, can people help being triggered? I guess people kind of beat themselves up a little bit when they get triggered by something, and they manifest some response. Can people actually help being triggered?
In the early stages of, well, I guess you could say, in that kind of stage where you may not even know there's a problem, except you feel terrible and you're feeling out of control and powerless, and your life isn't generally, it's not going well. Plenty of other problems like the ones we talked about begin to surface. I think it's really difficult not to get triggered. Again, another example from my personal experience, because stories are powerful. I really enjoy running as a recreation, and once I began to get on top of the insomnia and felt like actually exercising again, it became a really good thing for me to do on a daily basis. I was running down a trail. Remember, I was in Australia, which is one of the most poisonous, venomous, snake-infested countries in the world. I'm like a lot of people. I wouldn't say I have a phobia about snakes, but I'm definitely on the lookout for them. So I was running down this trail in the bush, and there was a stick across the path. Now, clearly, I wasn't on top of my anxiety because I mistook that stick for a snake, and I had a complete panic attack in the middle of a beautiful piece of bush about a stick lying across the path. Classic trigger. It related only to my wartime experience, in no way at all. There were no snakes in midwinter at 500 meters in central Bosnia, but my anxiety levels were still sufficiently high for the amygdala to switch in instantly and create a panic attack. It's really hard not to get triggered, hey? In the early
question
stages.
Is, what can you do when that happens? If that's inevitable to happen sometimes, when that happens, what can you do?
Well, I think this is just my experience, for example, with panic attacks, is tell yourself, this is just a panic attack. It will pass. You're not having a heart attack. You're not going to die. You don't have a serious illness. Just sit down, breathe, do whatever you can, but just let it pass. If it happens while you're driving, you want to pull off to the side of the road and just get yourself there. Obviously, you need to keep yourself and others safe. If you're in a family or you're in a relationship, be honest with your partner and say, look, I am going through high anxiety. If I start to have a panic attack, don't be alarmed yourself. I'm just going to sit with you. I'm going to let it pass. It's horrible, but it will pass. They don't last long, hey?
That's something that helps me just with all, it's a good rule for life, is this is temporary, it's not going to last.
Absolutely. Something like, certainly in Australia, the statistic that was bandied about is that 80% of emergency, hospital emergency room visits for a heart attack actually panic attacks, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with the heart itself. And it's such an interesting, interesting but terrible in a way, because there are so many people out there experiencing anxiety, whether it's PTSD or not, just overall anxiety to such a degree that they are having panic attacks.
Yeah. When someone else gets triggered, what can someone else do to help that person?
Great question.
I'm sure, as I have dealt with these things badly in the past, because we don't understand them, and we give them some advice, and it's probably the worst advice possible. But we all try and do our best in those situations. What's actually good for a person when they've been triggered by PTSD?
Yeah, another great question, James. So, actually, just before the last alert level lockdowns, I attended with my work team a fascinating workshop run by the Red Cross called Emergency First Aid. or emotional first aid. Really good day with, some really valid lessons relearned. So, anybody can do this. A complete stranger can do this. It doesn't have to be a work colleague or a friend or, a family member. But if you're having a panic attack, or if a person's having a panic attack, and you're just walking down the street, let's say, and you can see them, in a doorway, just like whatever, going through it, there's absolutely nothing wrong with approaching them and saying something like, "Are you okay? What can I do to help?" And just be with them. Be that strong, reassuring presence. You can talk them through it. You can be encouraging, and you don't need to trade names or anything. It's just another human being with a human being who's suffering.
Yeah.
And you don't need any other skills except just be available.
That's easy.
Yeah.
I guess it should be, as long as we don't start trying to give them bad advice.
Well,
I guess,
the beautiful thing about this is you don't need to give some advice,
Yeah.
Just that human presence, and a kind of confident presence is incredibly important. Funny enough, one of the reasons it's so important is that, we've spoken before about the isolation and the withdrawal that comes with post-traumatic stress disorder. So if you're having a panic attack, you feel even more lonely, for example, or a triggering, triggered response. So we're not designed to be alone. It's like at an emotional level for a human being, we're actually incredibly social animals. And back in the day, in the Stone Age times, our survival literally depended on being with other people. So simply sitting or standing or being with another person provides a level of reassurance that cannot be underestimated.
I think.
Yeah, go ahead.
Dealing with suicide's the same thing. I mean, it's one of those things where someone's suicidal, and some people are just too scared to deal with it.
Yeah.
But I think, just that human presence, being there and being willing to be with that person when they're in that state it's good enough. Most of the time, it's amazing how powerful that actually
Absolutely.
is. Just being there and caring, and we're always worried about going to say the wrong thing, but if you try your best, I think it's infinitely more valuable than not.
Definitely. And be honest. Be honest about it. If suicide or a panic attack, it's. I think it's important, if the person tells you, "Oh, my heart's pounding, I'm clammy, I feel really bad, I think I'm really sick," if a person is sufficiently aware to go, "Wow, God, that sounds horrible. Do you need me to call for help? I mean, do you need an ambulance? Would you like to sit it through? Has it happened before?" The person might say, "Yeah, no, I'm having another panic attack." And you just go, "Okay, you're having a panic attack. It will pass." Do you know what I mean? And I'm going to stay with you until you feel better. How does that sound?
Sounds good.
With suicide, it's really important to name it. Are you thinking of ending it? And the person will say, "Yeah, I am." And the response is, "Well, please don't do that. The world needs you, people need you, and get them to talk about it, get them to express verbally, because it produces what happens with all of this is they begin to regain some intellectual strength, as opposed to being swamped by that subconscious emotional stress-driven response.
Yeah. What treatments are available to deal with PTSD, and can it be cured?
Can it be cured? And what treatments? Okay, fortunately, today, the condition is, number one, much better understood. And secondly, I think it's because so many more people are talking about it and kind of breaking down those barriers of shame or anything else. That there's a lot more help available in the community, both public and private therapists. So those are two really positive steps forward. I think workplaces are much more aware of mental health issues, potentially in employees or colleagues. And there's more support available out there as well. But in terms of the range of modalities, look, there are literally hundreds of ways of doing it and of working with a trauma survivor. And, my particular speciality, I loved it, was clinical hypnotherapy, which works directly with the brain and the nervous system, but also works with the power of imagination. It works with dreaming, but specifically rapid eye movement, the rapid REM phase of dreaming, which is in fact trance. It's incredibly effective. In fact, you may not be aware, but in World War I, hypnotherapy became the therapeutic tool of choice to treat what was known back then as war hysteria or battle nerves. And it was used both in Britain, France, and with our adversary at the time, by German doctors as well, to treat soldiers. So, clinical hypnotherapy, we've got wonderful techniques. Neuro-linguistic programming is linked to hypnotherapy, can be highly effective. There's a whole set of techniques to use with that. Emotional freedom technique, which uses a method of tapping into specific, I guess you could say, acupuncture points to help people, has had some fantastic results. I think one really interesting area that is coming forward and, emerging legislation is right behind it, is in the use of psychoactive drugs that one would think normally are being used for recreational purposes, just get high, get wasted, whatever. And I'm talking about MDMA, psilocybin from specific types of mushrooms, and so on. But it's turning out that used therapeutically in a therapy context with a trained therapist, people are getting wonderful results through those kind of treatments.
We spoke about this, didn't we?
Yeah.
And I just said, this is funny because it's such a grey area, because myself, when I've thought about those three specific chemicals sound like a great time, but I know for a fact that I probably was self-medicating for my anxieties and insecurities, for sure, and they certainly weren't any solution to that. So just stressing that when done professionally with a therapist who's trained in that, can, and I'm sure it's not in the doses and just looseness that we used to engage in that. So just to be really clear on that one, because my addict mind goes, oh, what, MDMA cures PTSD? Brilliant. I'll sort that out every weekend for the next 10 years at every rave.
That's it.
And I am sure that's not how it works.
Yeah, no, spot on, and great disclaimer. The word is therapy setting, trained therapist, and legal. I don't even know if it's these things have made it through legislation in New Zealand. I think they've just been passed for use in some states in the United States and in Canada. Yeah.
I think MAPS is the big one in the States, isn't it, doing MDMA-assisted psychotherapy? And they actually had, I'm always sort of like really, really hesitant to go down that route or even to talk about it, but it was actually kind of mind-blowing, the results that they've had when dealing with I think that they had one study had like I can't remember if it's 1 or 2/3 success rate of curing PTSD with MDMA-assisted psychotherapy, which is absolutely mind-blowing.
Yeah, but we were therapists. I was trained and taught that there's something like 500 or 600 different modalities out there. I mean, you've got shamanism, you've got just endless, absolutely endless methods and methodologies a person can engage with. The most important component in seeking help is the personal relationship between the therapist and the client or customer. And it's for the client, and I've been a client myself from time to time. There's nothing wrong with going back for a bit of a top-up, or to relearn old lessons, or to reground yourself. It is, do you, as a client, really trust your therapist? Is it a person you just feel that, human connection with, somebody you really want to work with? And, if that relationship is solid, it doesn't matter what modality you're taking. The healing is going to come from you feeling that you're okay as a person. You as a person, remember, are not the problem. The problem is the problem. And together, the mission is to get on top of that problem and find solutions for it.
It's a very narrative therapy way of looking at it, isn't it?
Yeah, look, narrative therapy,
isolating the problem.
Absolutely.
But
and
what's really interesting,
and creating a new story for yourself.
Yeah. What's really interesting is that, they've looked at all the studies, and there's actually like no difference between different modalities. It's like there's no one that's better. They all work. It's just as long as you have a therapy has a method of working, they all work about the same, which is kind of strange. But I know with PTSD, I think it is probably slightly different because when looking at I know that EMDR's one that's supposed to be quite effective when specifically dealing with PTSD.
It is.
Or is it?
I speak from experience.
You spoke to me. Yeah. And that because do you want to talk a little bit about that one? Because I think is that the most effective with dealing with PTSD, or is there a few?
No, there are a few. I'll talk about EMDR in a second from a personal point of view. There's an excellent therapist. He's written a number of books. He holds workshops all over the world. His name is Peter Levine, and he's developed a very natural form of therapy. He calls it somatic therapy. And it's really based on working with how both animals and humans, we're a mammal too, get that traumatic event locked inside us. And his form of therapy releases that physical tension, that because the brain has been rewired and the nervous system has gone on to high alert. So he uses some really cool techniques to release that. And there's a great National Geographic video, if I can just explain how this works. Great National Geographic video showing a group of researchers chasing a polar bear by helicopter across the sea ice. This polar bear is running for its life with a helicopter full of scientists behind it. They dart it, with a general anesthetic. The polar bear goes down. The scientists, weigh, measure, take their blood tests, whatever they need to do with this comatose polar bear that's been running for its life. And then they wait as the anesthetic begins to wear off. And the polar bear goes into this shaking, literally really violent trembling for about 5 minutes. It's all on film. But at the end of it, the scientists retreat to the helicopter. The polar bear gets up, gives a final shake, kind of looks around and just walks off. That is how, in nature, we're kind of programmed to deal with trauma. And if you've ever had a near miss, one of the first responses is you begin to tremble. What Peter Levine does in a therapeutic setting is to help people work with that natural physical release around specific events or even general events to do what should have happened naturally but has not happened and has been stored within the physical body. Very, very powerful.
He's got
great results.
His book's literally called Healing Trauma, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, there's one for people to explain. I really like the physical therapies. You remember the nightmares I was speaking about of being trapped in the World Trade Center. Look, it was a kinesiologist, somebody who works with muscle testing, who literally cured me of those nightmares in one session. And she did it, I didn't know at the time, but using a technique that I later used with hundreds of people, drawn from hypnotherapy, where she put me in a very light trance. I was pretty well conscious, but eyes closed, and we just replayed the scene again and again and again on a kind of inner TV screen until I got thoroughly bored with it. And I tell you, I got up off that table, number one, feeling a ton had been lifted from my shoulders. I mean, I was loose, baby, for the first time forever, really. It was just extraordinary. Driving home, I was going, God, number one, I really hope this works, was my thing. And I'm curious about going to bed tonight. But the other emotion I felt was hesitancy and doubt. What if it doesn't work? What if the nightmare comes back? But, those nightmares never came back, and they haven't done to this day. And, that was such an important doorway to be able to step through, because being able to sleep again, being able to avoid self-medicating, before bedtime, being able to wake up feeling more refreshed and confident about the day ahead, just started that upward spiral.
But had that affected it, that the self-medicating naturally stopped, or there was less desire to do it?
There was less desire to do it. Any addict at the end of the day, I think, having been there myself, is basically powerless or feeling powerless about the substance. Even though they hate it, even though they want to get on top of it, they'll go back to it again and again and again. So you do need to apply some willpower, But because this particular therapist, the kinesiologist, removed such such an important problem, it allowed me, it gave me traction and agency over beginning to then get on top of all the other stuff that had begun to come into my life around that problem.
That when you first told me about that last time we spoke, that really struck me. It was kind of, could you call it kind of an exposure therapy? Because you said that she helped you to kind of go back to what happened and then replay it over and over again, play it fast, play it slow, so that you felt like you had some control over what actually happened.
Absolutely. What she did is she didn't tell me to look at a TV or a movie screen, which some therapists did. She just said, create something that you'd like to play a movie on. And I ended up putting a beautiful gold gilt picture frame on a wall. And that's what, my nightmare played out in. And you had to really concentrate. But the therapist was there. She guided me with her voice. I've done it with hundreds of people since. And I really trusted her. She was good. And I'd had 2 sessions beforehand. And, so we had a little bit of relationship. I trusted her. And the first time I brought up those nightmare images of being trapped in the World Trade Center and almost being able to smell the smoke and hear I won't go into it. It was horrible. The heart began to pound. I mean, there's the amygdala going, man, this is dangerous, and the mind can't tell the difference between imagination and actuality. If you're thinking it, it can feel as though it's actually happening. So, to begin with, there was a certain amount of heart pounding and stress response. But the more I played that movie forward, and then you play it in reverse going back, and you do it at different speeds, et cetera, the more, first of all, it just became, this is not happening in here. This is just out there on that picture frame. So what I know now is that she was allowing me to disassociate from the immediacy of that experience and just see it as something out there, no longer in here. And you have to concentrate, it's like meditating. If your mind begins to wander, it's like, no, get back to that screen. And in the end, honestly, it just became boring. And then she did, just another little closing off. There are numerous ways of doing it. But we turned the movie into a black and white, not Technicolor, and we just made the picture frame smaller, until it got down like that, and then bing, gone.
That's fascinating.
And as I said, I got up off that table, couch, feeling a ton lighter, indescribable.
She sounded like she was a very good therapist.
She was outstanding. She was outstanding. Now, here's the interesting thing. Kinesiology is just a technique. You work with the muscle. If something is good for you, a food, whatever, it can be used in so many different ways, or something is true for you, the muscle will go stiff, strength. If it's not true or it's bad for you, it literally goes limp. This is the subconscious sending a signal. So we'd done the previous session, I told her about self-medicating with alcohol. I told her in the first session. In the second session, she said, well, could you bring in, just, in a container, a little bit of scotch and a little bit of wine. They were my 2 weapons of choice. So I did that for the second session. We did muscle testing around it. And it turned out that my arm was strong. It wasn't bad for me. Do you know what I mean? So that wasn't the problem. The problem was the way I was using it. And the real problem was what I was using it to try and achieve, which was to knock myself out so I could sleep. And that's when in the third session, that was when I told her, she said, look, we've had a couple of talks, you've brought in food, you've brought in grog. Those aren't the problems. Is there anything else you'd like to help me with? And that is when I first told her about the night nurse. And she said, she was brilliant because she was working with a strong, recently left the military guy. She understood, I don't want to be pussyfooted around. I just want clear orders, basically, as a client. And she said, do you want to get rid of this problem? Because you can keep it if you want it. And I looked at her as if she was an idiot. And I said, no, I'd love to get rid of the problem. It's literally a pain in the head. And she said, okay, we're going to do it. Lie down, she said, order, lie down on the couch, close your eyes and shut up. I'll never forget it. And I went, yes, ma'am. And I was straight down, and, that's great therapy. I mean, she got me and she knew who she was working with. If I'd been a very sensitive, touchy-feely, person, that approach would have been too confrontational. But she'd have used a different one. Yeah,
and I'm fairly sure that not everybody wants to get rid of the problem because it's doing something for them and protecting them. And I'm sure that when someone says, "Do you really want to get rid of the problem?" it's actually protecting them. So maybe they don't always really sincerely want to get rid of it yet.
Oh, absolutely. I saw this so often where we were trained to really have an understanding about what benefits would depression give a person. What does a person get out of being anxious? Do you know what I mean? And as horrible as these things are, and life limiting, and even potentially dangerous if they go too far, it is extremely common for people to only want to get, so much better instead of very better. Especially, the longer symptoms or a cluster of symptoms, those three patterns of depression, anxiety, and anger go on, the more they become part of a person's life, and the more difficult it is to, challenge yourself with, well, if I really do get through this, what does it mean? Am I going to need to be more responsible? Am I going to have to go out and get work that's going to really challenge me? Am I going to have to drop the story, narrative therapy about, oh, I'm depressed, I'm, blah, 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 pity me, look after me, etc., etc. And by the way, I hope this doesn't sound too harsh, but it is so common, it's worth raising. And one of the things I explained with my clients, living with post-traumatic stress disorder is, if you really want it, we are going to get on top of it in a way that, it's not going to resurface unless you get lazy and a bit stupid and let your stress levels go up. And then it may reappear in a different form. But, what you're going to have to do is learn to live without PTSD. And one of the ways it was actually a Vietnam vet, Australian Vietnam vet, who taught me this one right at the end of his sessions, and he thanked me, and I said, well, no, thank you, And he said, no, I really want you to understand, Richard, that you've taken the disorder out of post-traumatic stress and you've turned it or help me turn it into an advantage. And I just thought, wow, that is an amazing thing to hear. And I began to introduce it with my next clients. Because, we do have a choice as people, and we can allow ourselves to be defined and for our life to be defined by what has happened to us, in terms of an event or an experience, and how we've tried to make sense of that, even in unhealthy ways. We can allow ourselves to be defined by that. But we can also go, I'm not going to be defined by that experience, and I'm going to use what I've learned through that experience, as tough as it's been, to move forward with renewed confidence and hope. And that is the goal of I think, of any therapy.
I got asked this question,
Sure.
And the question was, we spoke about loads of different therapies and ways of approaching this. And one thing that it seems apparent to me is that it's a journey, and it's not maybe not one therapy, and it's maybe not one thing, but it's like an ongoing kind of like meandering of trying to find your way through this extremely complicated and overwhelming thing, and until you find that thing, unless you're very lucky and find something amazing the first time. But there needs to be some determination there, and willingness to go through something quite difficult. I got asked, is there something some therapies that are more gentle than others? Are there some that are more straight to the point? And which one, if you wanted to approach it from kind of a more gentle way, which one do you recommend?
Well, again, I'm going to bring this back to the therapist and the therapist's understanding, even call it wisdom, about the person he or she is sitting with or working with. That relationship with the therapist simply cannot be understated in any shape or form. In terms of gentleness and working with different personality types, the skills therapist, no matter what modality they're using, or is their kind of area of expertise, if you like, will be able to work with all personality types, and with very fragile people to very strong people. My personality type, I am empathetic and all the rest of it, but I'm a leader. I'm quite strong. I like to be in control and in charge. So I like to sit with somebody who's quite strong and knows how to be in control and knows how to be in charge. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
That works for me, or can at least be that way with me. Her next client might be a wonderfully soft, intuitive, lovely person who needs a different way of being worked with.
Yeah. So there might be a need to change therapist if you're having a really bad experience.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, that was a question I used to ask clients directly, when I got to know them a bit. And, it was, how are you finding this experience? What benefits are you getting from it? Am I the right person? My feelings will not be hurt. In fact, I'd be thrilled to, put you towards someone else if this is not what you want. And they appreciated that honesty. The other thing, because, this is all about empowerment, and therapy should, in my opinion, be fun, enjoyable, and ultimately an empowering experience. It should not be painful. I very rarely had, tears or, real emotional expression in therapy sessions, because we're not about making people feel worse. We want them to feel better. And there's nothing wrong with a bit of laughter at all. That's very important stuff in rewiring the brain. But towards the end of treatment, well, I guess one thing I gave everybody based on experience was this course of treatment is going to take X, Y, Z number of sessions to get through, in my experience. I might be out by 2 or 3 sessions, that's fine, but we're going to talk about it. And towards the end of that kind of contract, if you like, I'd be going, let's start thinking about when you want to bring this to a close. Give them the decision. Take the therapist out of it. When are you going to feel confident to break out sessions to every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks, once a month, or just begin to, wind it down? Very, very important.
Yeah.
You want to put them in. You want to put them in the driver's seat.
Yeah, you want to, as a therapist, you want to be the stepping stone for them to get out into the world rather than be their life raft. Yeah. Yeah,
correct. And you absolutely do not want to enable that dependency on, the pattern, depression, anxiety, anger in any shape or form. That's not therapy. That's unwittingly keeping someone or helping someone stay stuck in where they are. If we've got time, I didn't answer the question about EMDR, eye movement desensitization. So this is actually working with a form of rapid eye movement sleep. What happens when we dream in REM? This is when we dream. So it's a very light phase of the sleep cycle. And what happens is the eyes go back and forth, literally behind closed eyelids. If you've ever seen a dog having a dream, or someone else dreaming, the eyes will do this. So what EMDR does is replicate that REM cycle while the therapist is basically with the client, and very much doing that kind of rewind technique that I used to do in hypnotherapy and that helped me recover from those nightmares. I've been through it myself. It is surprisingly effective. It really is. You might not notice the results straight away, but I had a number of sessions just a few years ago, actually, about 5 years ago. This is all coming back to, can you cure yourself of PTSD? I found, a really good psychologist, and specifically using this technique, which is why I sought him out. It was fantastic, actually. But I didn't know it at the time. It was only months later I just began to notice, God, I feel more capable of doing this. I feel more confident about doing that. So people mustn't always expect kind of immediate result. It can be cumulative. Very effective.
And I think that ties into that. I guess it's with all mental health problems, is that when you have one, there is like a really long lingering anxiety of like, is this going to get me again? And I guess with the PTSD, it's always that thing like, at any moment, am I going to be triggered? Is this going to happen again? And I guess it takes, because I had really chronic anxiety, and it took me 12 months to actually get the confidence to be happy.
Yes, I know.
I denied it. Like I was like, I didn't dare be happy. I felt like I was capable. It was all there. Everything was in place. It's like, I could be happy now, but I don't dare because I'm just too scared to get smashed down again. And it took after 12 months of me realizing like that anxiety is actually not, it's actually like stopped overwhelming me.
Absolutely.
And then I was like, okay, well, I'm actually going to, all right, let's like start living my life again.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful story, and it's just shared by so many people, including myself. I used to give my clients a lovely poem which my teacher, hypnotherapy teacher in the UK, had given me. It's called the pothole. And basically it goes, I walk down the street, I fall in a hole, and it takes me a long time to get out. Later, I walk down the same street, I fall in the same hole, it takes less time to get out. Later, I walk down the same street, fall in the same hole, it's even quicker to get out. And it goes through a few things, but it finishes with, even though I'm walking down the same street, I'm not stepping into that hole.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And,
yeah.
I think it's to the point you're making it. I don't think there's a quick fix, and there's certainly no cure for the struggles in life. I mean, the world can be a tough place, It's just how you learn to avoid those potholes. Stay away from trouble. And if you see one coming up, take those steps that are going to get you around it. And this brings me back to, I said at the beginning, very interested in anthropology and specifically paleoanthropology. Why are these hunter-gatherer societies so healthy, and why is there almost no mental health problems in these societies? And I spoke about the protective measures, and they're pretty simple, really. Get sunlight, incredibly important. Exercise, this is what I was testing in my walk down New Zealand. The average hunter-gatherer, believe it or not, walks the length of New Zealand every single year, just in their quest for firewood, for game, for water, for moving camp, etc., etc. They are on their feet. They're running in short sprints. They're doing a lot of chopping, hauling, lifting, carrying. They're exercising the whole time. And, it's well known that kind of exercise produces a flood of natural drugs. It produces the opioids, it produces the cannabinoids, it does it all. And, I've experienced the runner's high many, many times, and it's absolutely brilliant. And I was as high as a kite in the end, walking down New Zealand, because I was walking 10 or 12 hours a day with 10 kilos over my back in some of the most beautiful wilderness settings you can imagine. I mean, I was literally so chilled out, and at the same time, really nicely elevated. Do that for 4 months and see where your anxiety is at. It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Nutrition.
Is that how long it took?
Sorry?
Is that how long it took? 4 months?
Yeah, I ended up, it would have taken about 6 months to walk it step by step, but I leapfrogged. I basically chose my own route and leapfrogged through areas that I really wanted to be in. So I'd go into a national park for up to 2 weeks at a time, carrying everything I needed. I didn't hunt or gather. That's really time-consuming and really quite difficult. But what I did, just about to speak about food, what I did is I tried to replicate to the best of my ability the kind of food that, say, a European hunter-gatherer would have eaten 10 or 20,000 years ago, back in the Neolithic age. So, dried meats, porridge, whole grains, all of that kind of thing. So that was my diet, and that really helped as well. And of course, processed sugary foods are terrible for the brain. In fact, they can cause mental health disorders. Never mind foster them. But one mistake I made in that walk was hunter-gatherer societies think you're absolutely crazy if you go on your own on extended journeys in the wilderness, because it's just a dangerous, foolish thing to do. Remember, there's safety in numbers. So one thing I'd have done differently, although I found plenty of companionship on the trail, is actually go with one or a group of like-minded people. I think that would be amazing. And it was one of the most enjoyable things about being a soldier was, doing some pretty gnarly stuff with people you trusted, all on the same page, trained to the same level. And that was a lot of fun, actually, and
Yeah.
very, very good for the person. Um, yeah, and having meaningful work is just extraordinarily important. It's not just the colleagues you work with, but
Mm,
really having that sense of purpose that I'm engaged in something for 8, 9, or 10 hours a day, 5 days a week, or whatever your work is, and just go, this is more than money. It's more than keeping a roof over my head. This is something that I'm really, really invested in. It gives me that purpose, which gets me out of bed in the morning and helps me go to bed with a load of good memories, not problems.
I
So
think one of the I think one of the beautiful things about having a meaningful job or life in general is that even when it's hard, because let's be real, like life is hard. Life's not always good. Life's maybe good half of the time if you're lucky, and the other half's difficult. It's kind of depending on how your life is. But life isn't easy,
absolutely,
and things do come along. But when you've got something meaningful to do, even when it's really difficult and not good for you, there's still some meaning to do it anyway. And especially if you're helping other people somehow, even when it's bad for you, you're still going to do it, and it's going to be good for someone else. And
absolutely,
that usually makes you happy in return anyway. So
it does absolutely. Um, and I think, I'm just talking from personal experience here. I'm so fortunate, one, to live on Waiheke Island, which is one of the most beautiful places in the world. But two, to spend 6 hours a day with a team I've trained. They're exceptional human beings. The number one quality we hire on is, are you kind? Are you are you kind to yourself? Are you compassionate? Are you going to be compassionate to your colleagues? And do you really love and care for your natural environment? It's not, I don't think many people hire on that basis, but it is such a joy, even though it is really hard work, because we're in the bush and we're off track all day long, often on steep slopes, etc., etc. But it is such a joy to work with these people to help restore Waihiki's biodiversity. And to have all of those protective factors that hunter-gatherer people have. It's you couldn't ask for a PTSD survivor a better way to spend your day.
yeah.
It's cool.
And that's really helped. All of those things being outside, and yeah, because it's interesting to move from the psychotherapy. I mean, I imagine that that was a really difficult decision to actually move out of that world, because it's kind of like being in a position where you're helping people, and to kind of be to actually I would imagine, like, I would find that difficult to make that decision.
It's I was an army officer for nearly 20 years. It was extremely difficult to leave that profession. I adored it. I'm incredibly lucky to have that as a career. Um, I was a psychotherapist for nearly 10 years, and it was difficult. But one thing morphed into another. And I'm 60 now, and I've been through a huge number of changes, and done my best. I always said when I was a young man, "What do you want out of life, Richard?" And it was, when I'm too old to do anything but sit in a rocking chair, I want to be able to look back on my life and go, "Wow, what a ride that was!" That for whatever reason, that was my vision. I just said, it was like, I want to experience the lows, I want to experience the highs, and I want to experience everything in between. And I never, ever want to be bored. It's like, bring it. PTSD really got in the way of that, but that turned out to be such an important stepping stone because of the understanding it gave me and the opportunity to help other people. And it's just led into this career. I've always been an outdoor person, so it's perfect. And at my age, really good to be exercising so hard and to be with young people. They're all in their 20s and kind of keep up with them and lead where I can and let them develop their own strengths. I just feel really, really blessed and immensely grateful for everything that I've been through, that I put myself through. And to have that kind of confidence that, well, who knows what's going to be next? There'll be another change. Nothing stays the same forever. It's like PTSD, this will not last forever.
No.
Unless you want it to.
Yeah. That's awesome, Richard. Thank you so much. Is there anything else you would like to add?
No, I don't think so. James, thank you. Well, really, just thank you so much for hosting me on the show. I always say I hope I haven't spoken too much. But it's been wonderful to meet you again, and well done you for doing this podcast. I really admire it.
Thank you, Richard. It's been really interesting. I think it's been really helpful. Is there anywhere anyone can find you? You're on Free the Tree, or I know you've got some therapy stuff on Bandcamp as well.
That's right. So so my website is freethetree.co.nz. You can email me. Anyone can email me through that for contact details. I think you've got the link for Bandcamp, haven't you?
Yeah, I'll put it in the notes.
Yes, if you want. And I think, I'm always happy actually to, hit me with an email or whatever. And, I'm not a therapist anymore, so it wouldn't be that context. But if you have a question or if you need a bit of help in being pointed in the right direction, I'm totally available for doing that. It's very, very important. And once this wretched lockdown finishes, I'm really looking forward to getting back on the speaking circuit and helping ordinary New Zealanders understand more about post-traumatic stress disorder, what to do about it, what help is out there. Come along to one of those events. It'd be a pleasure to meet you.
Absolutely, yeah. And we've been speaking about coming over to Waiheke finally, and having a tour around there. So I'm
fantastic! Yeah, I'll take you on a good walk.
I don't know, maybe Tuesday.
Followed by a good lunch, hopefully. That would be a pleasure, James.
Sounds brilliant, Richard. Thank you so much.
All right, buddy. You're welcome. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. And
Will do.
Everybody out there, stay well. Be kind.
I hope that you enjoyed the show, and I really appreciate you stopping by. If you found some benefit from listening to this episode, please hit subscribe and share it with anyone that you think might need it, so that we can try to turn the tide on the devastating mental health epidemic that the world is facing. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you next time. Break the chain.